Hey, everybody, welcome to Pink Shade. This is a bonus episode. You guys, I've got my friend here. It's Jonathan Mark. Now, you guys know Jonathan Mark. He's a friend of Kate Casey as well. He is a psychic medium and he has helped many true crime cases. He's currently got a podcast. He's worked with FBI investigators. He's in it, guys. He's in the true crime world, but like legit. He's done a reading for me that I've talked about many times on this podcast. It completely changed my life. Like it really, really did. And Jonathan's here to talk to me about Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix. There's an episode called My Paranormal Partner. It's on Netflix. They say V5 episode 2, which I think is supposed to be like version 5 episode 2. But when I watched it a couple of months ago, I was like, oh my God, I got to talk to Jonathan, see what he thinks about this. So here he is, Jonathan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And that was such a great intro. Thank you.
I think I said it right. Psychic medium, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So, but some people say they're psychic and some people say they're a medium.
Yeah.
So tell me the differences between all those things.
Sure. So if you're just a psychic, you're only telling like the future tense. So like anything that happens in the future. And a medium is like the medium spot of connecting the living to the past, like the past, like far back or just your family. And a psychic medium is both.
Okay. All right, cool. So you're telling me you could tell me my future?
Listen, I tell people that, the truth is that it's a very unpredictable thing to like tell someone unless it's like really health related or something that's more concrete. Cause I think free will has so much to come into play.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. Okay. Now, before we get into this episode, I wanted to talk to you about some of the terms we're going to hear in this episode. Okay.
Sure.
The man that is the focus of this episode, his name is Don Phillips, and he's a paranormal investigator.
Yep.
Okay. So from the jump, that's where we start with this guy before we get into the Becky of it all. What is a paranormal investigator, like what we would consider like a ghost hunter, somebody that's going to go in and say like, oh yeah, there's something in this house and you can stage it or tell it to leave?
Yeah. So a lot of like paranormal like experts or like hunters or whatever people want to call them really go into like a location or a spot and people will notice that they have like these machines kind of with them, like these like voice box and stuff. So like they're trying to like read like the area versus like if I was to read like a person. So like the paranormal will, I guess you could say, talk to ghosts. Yeah, exactly like that.
Because you see these shows and some of them you're like, is this real? Is this fake? But you go into a building, a place, let's say, and you're like, okay, everybody knows this place is haunted. People have been seeing things here for years or whatever. And then you go in and you have your little machines and things, and it's supposed to be picking up on sort of energy in the air. And you think all, in your opinion, and you're a smart guy, you think all of this is like legit. None of it is like hokey or anything.
I think it's a 50-50. I'm not going to lie. I think some of it is obviously for TV and then some of it is probably like legitimate.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll take it. So we start this show, Unsolved Mysteries, with Don Phillips. So he's a paranormal investigator, and he was investigating. He's in the UK. He was investigating he said, a very haunted house by a woman named Gaynor Issett, and he said it was the most haunted residential case he's ever seen. So he's in the house and they're showing like ring camera footage inside the house and stuff. And we meet the homeowner, Gaynor, who says when she moved in, little things would happen. Things would disappear and come back and it was fine. But then it got bad. Things got scary. And her youngest son was talking to someone and then she would ask and the son would say, I can't tell you, he won't like it. And she said curtains caught fire in her house. And she said you would be walking towards the stairs and you could feel fingers on your back, like they were going to push you down the stairs. So this bad entity had turned from things disappearing to things threatening to kill her. And he said, Don is telling us Gaynor has done a lot of things to get rid of this spirit. But I can go in and I can actually maybe talk to the spirit and see, what's going on. I got this ability around age 7 or 8 to talk to these spirits to see sort of what they want. Now, is that your experience with your ability? Did you feel like when you were young, like something was coming through you like that and you didn't know what it was?
Yeah, so what like I think the first thing when I was young, I saw my aunt who passed away when I was only 6 months. So what I perceived as normal was not normal, I think, to
Mhm.
like now, now looking back and hearing things. So I do think that to some like level of it, like when when a child is speaking about something like that and they're so innocent, you can tell that it's true. Like they're not making up. And yes, there's some children with the imaginations and they'll say some things. But when it comes to someone when you're so young, I guess speaking about fact of like walking in to a place, but most of the time when I do readings, it's with the person. So I would like I've never really walked into like a location and like read off of the location before
Mhm.
so much. So it's hard for me to like kind of compare with that. But I think it'd be kind of hard because you can't validate. And like I'm all about the validation side of things.
Mhm.
Like if I walk into a building, I can be like, I feel 50 people, like, and
Right.
it's like, how
True.
can you validate that? Like, like you really can't unless you have a family member that lived there or worked there or etc. But when it comes to like the feeling the fingertips and all that, I still feel that to this day. I just
Oh,
never met an energy that tried to hurt someone.
okay. Okay. And that's interesting, right? Because you're kind of purposely contacting people usually,
Yes.
right? And it's not just you're going through the grocery store and something comes to you. You're
No, it
usually sort
does.
of sitting. Oh, it does. Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 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 it does. Like I can't control it, but like I've learned to ignore it if that makes sense. Like
Mm,
because like yeah, I'm just like an open floodgate, I guess, but like I said, I've never really had an experience where an energy or like an entity like try to like harm a human or
mm.
someone.
Okay. So that's interesting, right? Because you're saying all everything you're doing has felt as positive, and I feel like what we're going to get to here is mostly it's positive and
Yeah.
kind of until it's not. And so so this thing that was in Gaynor's house was like starting to make threats and the touching and all that, and she was like, obviously this is I can't live like this, right? And the whole thing about children, you hear that constantly, like my kid said this and you're like, or like my kid said there's this person in the closet and you're like, what?
Yeah.
And it's just because they are open and they don't think that there should be anything wrong with that person.
Right.
It's weird. It's weird.
Right.
But it
It's
is because kids are so
super
open.
weird. They
Yeah.
are. They are. And I always say that to people. I always say like the innocence of a child when they're telling you. And I think people can separate if it's their imagination versus like a visit at a certain point. Like I've spoken to kids where like some were absolutely connecting and some were like just had like a very big imagination talking about dragons and
Yeah.
this person. And you're like, okay, like now I know. But when they're talking about someone and they're so passionate about, but also describing what was being spoken about and how the person looked, it's like you can't really make that up versus like dragons on like a on the ceiling with this person and they're jumping around with like turtles. You're like,
Yeah, yeah,
okay,
yeah.
like that's a lot. Like that's a
Yeah,
lot going
that's
on.
that's imagination. Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So, this Becky now shows up here at this house, at Gaynor's house, and Becky somehow spoke to this dark entity and got rid of it. And Gaynor says, yeah, after that, this spirit was quiet and didn't show its anger anymore. So the spirit must have still been there, but just not doing these destructive things. And so he said, from being there and having Becky whisper to him and all that in that house, he said, well, maybe I'll invite Becky to go with me and help me, which I was like, okay. So we're like, okay, Becky, we're best friends now.
Right.
Let's go.
Right.
And he understood that there were going to be skeptics about it.
Yeah.
So he went to this guy, Steve Mira. Now, Steve Mira is the founder of the Scientific Establishment of Parapsychology.
Hmm.
Okay. Is this an organization you have ever heard of?
So I've not. I've been tested through like actual universities in the United States with
Hmm.
stuff,
Okay.
but I've never heard of that.
The Scientific Establishment of Parapsychology. So it's interesting. So, everybody in this show looks very British, right? He's
Hmm.
like has like a tweed coat. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's like an old
Yeah.
British guy.
Yep.
And Steve says, I heard about Don by watching him on the internet. I was not impressed. Now we do see Don in several clips, like sitting in front of like, the triangle eye and the stuff like written, like he's been in the movie with Russell Crowe with all the numbers.
Oh, yeah.
You
I
know what
know.
I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, actually. Yes.
Where he's like a math genius. He's sitting
Yep.
in front of something that looks like that. And I'm like, I don't think that's a way to be taken seriously. I think it looks
What?
hokey,
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like the
So
Ouija board. Yeah.
yeah, totally like the Ouija board. And Don goes, no, Steve goes, I saw Don and I wasn't impressed. Like I was like, no, I don't know what this guy's doing, right? So, and Steve says, I'm reluctant for anybody who says they have abilities because I'm a scientist, I'm a man of
Right.
evidence, I'm not a ghostbuster. So I thought, okay, well, Steve's got the right idea here because he's going it like you. He's going into everything with skepticism and not just going to like take it for face value because anybody could
Right.
say anything.
Exactly.
So he says, I wasn't interested in helping Don prove what he was feeling was real with this Becky and this spirit that was helping him. I'm only interested in facts. I'm not interested in these hoaxes. But Don kept persisting. I was like, please let me just I need somebody else, to validate me. So Steve goes, okay, I'll go around with Don. And Don goes, yeah, you tell it as you find it. And if you find I'm a hoax, say that too. But I just want you to go with me and tell me what you find. Because I think from the way I'm understanding this, Don is confused as well. Because I think he always had abilities, but now he's like, now this person has attached themselves to me.
Right.
Have you ever had that experience where you've channeled somebody and then felt like they kind of won't go or they come back to you when you're not talking to the client?
What's funny is, yeah, it's like when I'm working on cases, a lot of times when I'm connecting to like the victim, when I'm speaking to the family,
Mhm.
until there's like the movement in a case, whether it's being solved or just like a simple movement, they always stay with me, like always. Cause like when I work on cases, I try to focus on like a few at a time because then, things get weird. If I'm like, give me every single case that everyone has, like, then
Yeah,
it
of
gets
course.
weird. But what like a good example is Gabby Petito. Like when
Mhm.
I was working on that case, Gabby stayed with me for some time, and then I became very close with Nicole, the mom, and everyone. And she would come through randomly. But then, like when the case kind of got like situated, and the family was like kind of getting situated, that's when they started to pull away from me from that
Mm.
because they were going towards like sticking with like their loved ones and their family. So I
Mhm.
have had that, but like definitely not to like this guy's extent, I guess. Like that seems because I watched it and it was like this person was like stuck to him like
Yeah.
the entire time. So I
Yeah.
never had that. So
Yeah, it's like the person didn't leave.
right.
So they go back to Gaynor's house, the woman,
Yep.
and it's Steve from the
Yep.
Parapsychological Institute or whatever it's called, establishment, and he brings his colleague Jackie, and then, of course, Don is there. So Don says he goes into the house, and he explains that his ears are very attuned to this frequency that people are coming in from the other side, and he listens, and he hears it, but he also has a voice recorder and a video recorder, like what we're talking about, the equipment that you see sometimes.
Yep.
So he can confirm, he can hear it back to confirm what he heard, right? So he may hear it and not quite want to listen to it over and over. So he said the voice recorder picks up a different frequency than what he hears. So it's like a bunch of, I was like, all right. So Steve tells about hearing the voice recording that said, this is Becky. And this is, corroborating what
Yeah.
Don had said. And then they do this test, which I did not understand. So I guess they put 3 pictures in 3 different envelopes, and it could be anything in the world. But I guess that the theory here is that the spirit, Becky in this case, would see what's in the envelopes and
Right.
then be able to say what it was. So they do this test with the 3 envelopes, and the entity, which is Becky, um, tells Don what's in the envelopes, and he says, pick number 2, and it's a kite. And now Steve is a believer of Don and Becky,
Right.
because there really wouldn't be any way he would know that. So
Correct.
that was kinda weird.
It's very weird. It's really I've never had where like I went with a ghost hunter with the voice box because I see it all over social media. Like all these people now are like starting to do this where
Yeah.
they're going to like cemeteries and they're bringing like this voice box with them. And I'm like, is this real? Because they're getting voices and they're broadcasting it to thousands of people.
Mhm.
And that you can't make up. I've had a similar situation where not to bore anyone or anything, but I was brought onto a case like in Lima, Ohio.
Mhm.
Uh, and it was for like a TV show I was doing. And um, so the production company, like, and the showrunner did not believe a single thing about me, like straight up. Like even when they were speaking to the NYPD homicide and Unsolved and FBI, he still thought it was all showy and dumb.
Okay.
Like literally. And
Yeah.
he was doing it respectfully, but he was also being like a little curt with it. And
Mm.
so they basically gave me a plane ticket to like a location that was nowhere near Lima. And then when I got there, they blindfolded me, drove me a few hours, brought me to a hotel, woke me up the next morning, blindfolded me again, brought me to a warehouse, blindfolded me again, and brought me to like a random like trailer home that was emptied out. Like there was only like the kitchen was in there and then like a chair and a couch. And like all the
Okay.
pictures were gone, everything was gone. And he was there filming
Mhm.
because it was like the pilot. And I pulled in and I helped with the case and I helped turn a corner of the case in real time. But they kept me so separate that he was like, I'm a believer now because he's like, I did everything in my power. He's like, to screw with you. And he's a
Mhm.
very analytical guy. He was a very black or white type of guy. And he works in the unsolved, like in the true crime stuff. So he's very factual and, boots on the ground detective. Like that's what he does. And I've had a very similar experience where it's like you pull someone into like, I told him the kind of same thing that Don said. I was like, if you think I'm full of crap, then tell people I'm full of crap, but like test me. And that's
Yeah.
kind of what he did. He brought me onto a real active case there and tried to screw with me. Like he really did. Like it
But
was
what was in
really
the trailer,
bizarre.
though? What was the point of the going into the trailer?
So it was the person's home. It was the person's home, and I didn't know that. And the murder happened on top of the driveway. So I said to them, I want to go after I did the reading, I said, I want to go to the top of the driveway. And I walk up there, and it's just dirt and like a
Mhm.
mailbox. And the guy came up to me, the showrunner, and he goes, that's where he died. Like that's
Mm.
where he was murdered, was right here. If you look, he goes, I tried to rake it, but he's like, if you look, there was like a cross for them there that he had to pull out of the ground because he didn't want me to see like that,
Yeah.
like someone passed away there. It was like a whole thing. And then I'm sitting back and I was just like, I was kind of pissed. Like, yeah, like, they really went out of their way to really screw with me. And I was like, because he couldn't wrap his head around it. And I couldn't either because I was like, you flew me in, blindfolded me, drove me an hour, brought me to a hotel, blindfolded me when I came
It's
out the
so
next morning.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it was bizarre. And I'm like, what are we doing here? like, like
Yeah.
just, it was weird. So I get Don's whole thing, like of being like, yeah, like just follow me and let me
Yeah.
prove it to you versus like coming up with an assumption just because you're watching TV. Like he thought it was like the Hollywood medium stuff
Yeah,
where
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
like they just glitz and with all that stuff. So it was interesting.
Yeah, I thought I it was it's interesting how he's like, "I'm gonna make you a believer. I'm gonna make you a
Yeah.
believer." So now Steve of the parapsychological establishment becomes a believer of Don and Becky as like a crime-solving duo. I don't know, not really,
Right.
but a ghost hunting duo. So,
Yeah.
y'all, the most known secret with celebrities and influencers, so many of them have had liposuction. It's lipo. Whether it's a small touch-up or a total makeover, nobody has a perfect body, you guys. Nobody. But lipo has changed a lot, and Sono Bello has been at the forefront using their LAL technology and getting these beautiful natural outcomes for each person. LAL is laser assisted lipo, and the results are incredible. I have been on Sono Bello's website looking at the results, and I'm encouraged, and I'm going to make an appointment for a consultation. And right now, our friends at Sono Bello are offering you their best deal. You're now included in their Friends and Family Holiday Savings event. You're going to get the same price that Friends and Family get at Sono Bello. Their doctors are masters in micro laser fat removal. It's a brilliant technique that removes stubborn fat permanently. Whatever is your problem area, your tummy, your love handles, your thighs, your arms, they can do it all. And it's all gone in one comfortable visit. Eating healthy and workouts are great, and keep doing that. But if you want to lose that stubborn fat in one visit, check out Sono Bello. Save big during Sono Bello's Friends and Family Fall Savings event. Schedule your free consultation now at sonobello.com/pinkshade. Okay? sonobello.com/pinkshade. SONOBELLO.com/pinkshade. pink shade and go schedule your free consultation and get on that friends and family deal. So Dawn says, my understanding of Becky from what she has told me or, communicated to me, is she is a person who passed over and that she was a 35-year-old school teacher with 2 children who died in either a plane or a train crash in 1985. Now, to me, I'm like, well, that would be pretty easy just to get on the old internet and figure this out.
100%. Yep.
Now, this was when this is all going on, it's like the 2012 or so, but I mean, we
Right.
had Google then.
Yep.
So now Steve says I need to get Don out of Gaynor's house and see what happens. Let's see what else happens if we bring Becky along to do something else. So now they go to this other place. We're still in England. It's called Cannock Chase. And it's an old war cemetery that's known for its paranormal phenomena. Now, of course, you're like, it's an old British war cemetery, so it's going to be spooky,
Right.
no matter what, right?
Right. Creepy.
Why they do these things at night? I'm like,
It's beyond me.
Don't
Like,
don't the ghosts talk to you during the day?
yeah, they talk to me all hours of the day. Yeah.
Well, it's got to be at night just to scare the shit out of yourself
Yeah,
because it like looks scarier with like the night vision
of
camera, right?
course. Yeah. Yeah.
So Steve again takes his partner Jackie and she says, my role is to be an observer and to do the filming. So they go to the cemetery. It gets to be like 1, 2 a.m. Again, they could go in the middle of the day. And we see the video and Don is like on a path and he's like feeling this energy and he's sort of following it. Like I'm going this way because this is where I'm feeling it. And then he starts clutching his chest and he's sweating and he's panting. And Steve goes, I don't know if this guy's having a heart attack. And Don says, it's okay. I promise I'm okay. It's happened before. And he tells us that he doesn't know how to describe it, but he just calls it like a blast of energy. And he never had it before in his things where he would go to haunted houses and things. He never had it before until he had this union with Becky. And he has no control over it when it happens. Like when he walks into something and Becky is telling him this. So is this sort of, do you kind of relate to this? Like you're saying, like some of this stuff just comes to you. Does it give you heart palpitations, make you sweat,
It makes me sweat. If you look at like everything I do when it comes to like, interviews, when it's like a readings involved or just like anything with a reading, I'm always wearing a sweatshirt. And it's because I sweat so much that I don't want people to see me sweat. Like I'm dripping in sweat every single time I do a reading. I've never really done a reading like for a client or for anyone in like a t-shirt. And if it is like a t-shirt, it's a black t-shirt to hopefully like not let people see the sweat. But yeah, that's very normal. Even Tyler sweats, everyone's it's intense.
Yeah. But it seems like that wouldn't be good for your health to have that.
No, it's not. No, it's not. So like I've gone to the point where I was doing it and sweating and like, tapping in, whatever. And then one day I just went blind in my left eye for like 3 hours and I had to go to like a neurologist and I had to go to like eye doctors because I just went blind in my left eye from doing this so much. It was like the creepiest thing.
And so as you've gotten older, have you learned to, like you said, like if something does come to you in the grocery store, you've learned to, because if you walked around with every single entity trying to come at you, you would be in a panic all the time.
Literally.
Right?
And yeah, and I would be drained every single day, like more than I am, and like sweating. And it's also too, what I've learned is like you're invading someone's privacy too if you go up to them and say something, because some people are open and some people want to hear, and some people are either skeptical and don't want to hear, or it should be behind closed doors. Like you shouldn't just walk up to someone and just start hitting them with information that you see. So I've learned through experience like not to do that anymore. Like it's not the right thing to do. But if like when I go into concerts or anything, my wife sees that, she's like, he needs to go. Like I just get super overwhelmed and I'm sweating and I can't be around like a crowd. I really can't. It's
makes
bad.
sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, so now as they're going through the woods, right? He's following this energy and they say they pan up and they're under a tree that's covered in all these ribbons and things. And Steve goes, in this huge cemetery, how did he take us right to this tree? Like we couldn't even see anything. And Don says, I'll have to like ask Becky. Like, I don't know. And then Becky says, there's going to be another tree as well. And Don says, I have no idea why I was taken to that tree. Like, I assumed when I got there, there had been like a suicide or a murder or something had happened there. And then they find out that in that cemetery, a murderer had buried 3 kids there.
Oh
And
my God.
then all of these things were
Yeah.
people come and tied ribbons and left crosses and all these things for this murder. So Becky had led them there, right?
Right.
So weird. So Steve says, okay, obviously Becky is with him. And sometimes when we say this is going to lead us to the term possession, which is usually
Mhm.
not good. But every time I go and do something with Don, the bar is getting raised every time. Something crazier and crazier is happening. And you can't prove, there's no way to prove that he knew this cemetery that he'd never been before. There would be 2 trees with ribbons because children had murdered there. I mean, you know what I mean?
100%. Yeah.
So now they go to this Tutbury Castle. I just love all this like British stuff, right?
Yeah. It's awesome. Yeah.
And this is in 2015. They go to Tutbury Castle and they're like, obviously it's a medieval castle. A lot of bad things happen here. They have ghost hunters that come and want to see this torture chamber. It's very popular with ghost hunters to come and probably film shows there or whatever.
Right.
So Steve says, I'm going to go to Tutbury Castle, with my team and take Don and see what his capabilities are. Okay, now we meet Chris. So Chris is this paranormal investigator, and he says, I try to think outside of the box when it comes to EVP, electronic voice phenomena, which is what we're talking about when they pick up the voices. Right. He says what he uses is called a bat detector, and it just looks like a stick with a, dog cone of shame on it. And I wonder if that really has something to do with like the high-pitched sound that bats make. Is that why it's called that?
Oh, that's actually a good point. I don't know. That's a good point. I don't know.
Like, I wonder if that's why it's called that. If you're trying to. So he says,
Wow.
Many people, this is what Chris says, many people think you can't hear the voices because they don't communicate on the same frequency, but the bat detector can hear it because it's on the tip of the human frequency. And I'm like, this is so like out of my.
Me too, honestly. Yeah.
I'm like, wow. Because when you hear things, you don't literally hear somebody going, hi, my name is Becky, and I was 35 and died in a plane crash. You more like see things that come to you than you piece it together.
Correct. Yeah. It's like a Pictionary game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this is interesting because they're actually hearing these bits and pieces of these voices, it's crazy.
It's so nuts. I wish it was like that because then it would make my readings a lot easier and less stress on my body, honestly.
Yes. Yeah. So Don says, I walked into Tutbury Castle initially and felt nothing. I was just like, okay, well, I don't think anything's here and I don't think Becky's here. But he said the feeling as he got in there kept growing and growing. And then he felt like in the hallway where he was standing, it was getting worse and worse. And he says he felt like a portal was forming, which makes me think of like Stranger Things or like, that's all I could think about when I think about a portal.
Yeah, me too.
Anybody watch that? There's a portal and then they go to the upside down. And he says a portal will be an entrance or an exit from another domain to another domain. He said, so he's starting to feel this. I was like, oh my God. And he's feeling all this like energy in his body. And so he tells Steve, I think a portal is forming right above us. Like, that's what I'm feeling. And then Becky says portal, and Chris hears it on his bat thing. Chris hears it and then listens back to it. Okay. So he says, Chris goes, I felt it. And then I felt this energy come over me and all these emotions come over me. And I was reduced to tears and I didn't know if I wanted to laugh or to cry. It was, so Chris, guy number 3 is saying this. And then they say, then the portal opened. Now, how do they know it? I don't know, because they all of a sudden all felt this rush of energy. Right. But it says when it opens, it expels a great amount of energy. And Don was like, this was too much. It was too much. So Steve, now tell me what you think about this. So Steve gets these, what they call dowsing rods. Okay. So there are these rods that are shaped like an L, an upside down L. But the handle of it, where your handle would be to hold it, is in glass. Because first I was like, well, if you're just holding it, of course you can manipulate it with your fingers.
Right.
But the part that you're holding is in glass, so what you're holding cannot be moved.
Right.
And then we see Don doing like a Spider-Man thing. He's like, and then the rods are moving all around. What do
Oh
you
my
think of
God.
that?
I don't know. I don't know because like that to me is like like controlling of the energy, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, how, I think for me, it's like so hard. I mean, with what I do is obviously not normal, but it's like that. Like, I can't say that anything is not normal or like anything is different, but like I've never seen that before. So I don't know. Like, that's a different one for me. I've never really heard that before. And like when I watched it, I was like staring and I was like, how the heck did that just happen? You know, like what possessed that to happen? But then the only thing that can come to me is if that place is haunted and there are the portals there, and he's kind of like, to me, Don is like a clairvoyant person. It's like his funnel is just open, so he takes on what comes in and he feels what comes in. So it's kind of like if that portal was there and he's feeling that energy and then he's able to push it out, then maybe that's how it is. I don't know. Like that's the only thing when I watched it where I was like, that's like my logical brain of what I do and everything, like trying to piece things together. But you really can't in this situation.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
It was nuts, and because if we just would have shown him holding those little rods and they were moving, you're like, "Okay, well, that was
Yeah, they
easy
move. Yeah, they move their
to
wrist or something.
or
Yeah.
move the wrist, or they had, like, invisible strings or whatever," because
Right.
they showed how they were in those glass tubes, and then you think, "Okay, well, there are Reiki healers that use their energy and they
Right.
push it towards, to energy heal people, and that's a real thing, and
Right.
I don't believe it or not believe in it, it is what it is, and but for him to be doing, like, these, like, Spider-Man things and, like, and if you're not watching on video, I'm, like, literally doing my hands like, "Cha," like
Yeah.
Spider-Man, like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
throwing out your nets, and he's moving his hands and the rods are moving, and Chris is like, "Yeah, that was completely crazy and completely wild, and I think Becky exists. I think Becky was there helping him do that, and there was this portal," and I'm like, if I was Don, I would be scared to go to sleep. I'd be like,
Oh my
"What?"
god. Yeah.
I
It's
would be like, "Who's gonna get me?"
well, it's like the worst. Like when I don't want to say it's the worst. I don't want to say that, but when I do readings and stuff, when I'm sleep like the night before, when I have a client or whatever, they'll come to me and they'll I can't speak. They'll like play with my hair. They'll rub my back. They'll, like, get my attention, and then they'll start flashing, like, names in front of me to show me, like, who they are and who I need to focus on, and like, it's creepy because if people don't know, like, my mom does my appointments, but she keeps it so separate from me, and a lot of the
Mhm,
times people obviously give fake names and stuff, like, that's just
mm,
what it is, and that's fine, but they do come, like, the night before, like, and it's the weirdest thing. Super weird. So
mm.
I hate going to sleep. I hate it and I don't
Oh
sleep.
my god. Now I'm scared
Yeah.
for you. Scared
Yeah, it's
for
the
you.
worst.
Um, so Steve, tells us, "I realize that I need another pair of professional eyes." So he gets Barry Fitzgerald. So Barry Fitzgerald is an author. I can't say it. Au I can't say it.
I couldn't say
An authority, an authoritative figure.
couldn't say twirl, so don't
You
worry.
can say, yeah. Um, in the paranormal for over 35 years. He's an investigator and an author. He's been investigating. He's written a lot of books. So Barry goes, "All right, bring this guy to Ireland and let's see. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to really get him with our Irish ghosts, right?"
Yeah.
So, like you said, they took him to Ireland. He'd never been to Ireland. They didn't know where he was going at all, just like what they did to him before. And Steve himself, who was taking him, did not know once they got to Ireland where they were going because they got there and then they put him in a car and took him somewhere. They're really trying to make sure they have no information about where they're
Right.
going beforehand. So Barry takes Don and Steve to a place called Lisheen in Western Ireland. And they say Western Ireland is full of ghosts.
Yeah.
And as they're approaching the site where they're going, Don says to to Barry. He goes, I get a feeling that the place we're going has been overtaken by nature. Like I feel like a canopy of nature above me. And then they showed the picture of this place, which is a house that's been totally over. Trees are growing in and out. And that's crazy. He's not only never been to Ireland, he's never been to this town. He's certainly never been to this site. And as they're approaching it before they can see it, he says, I feel the place we're going is overrun by nature, which is wild.
Yeah, sometimes when like I'm sure other mediums too, like I know Tyler and whatever, and we most mediums including like Don, like we'll know things like before like the reading happens, and like my manager and like all these people, they all try to trick me still to this day, like
Mhm.
literally to this day. And I'll say to him, similar to what, Don did, I'll be like, I see like a plane crash like coming. Like it's a plane, like not like for him, but like for like someone's passing who I'm reading, who he's not telling me who I'm reading. He's like,
Got it.
this is like a random person to you, but this is someone that I know, like wouldn't tell me a male, female, like, and like everyone does that. And it turns out that it's like the person coming through died in a plane crash. And it's like,
Mm,
so like it happens, and it's like I don't even understand it for myself. So I can't even imagine what he was feeling at that moment too, because
mhm.
it gets validated like hours later.
Yeah.
Like you see it hours later when you do a reading or when you show up to like a location. So I can't
You're like,
imagine what he
"Oh, that makes
feels.
sense now because now what I saw earlier makes sense now." Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but this house, he said, when they get to the place, there's like that it's like the house was being, swallowed by the earth. It was like a really
That's
creepy place.
crazy.
So, of course, as they go there, it's getting to be nighttime because why would you go during the day?
Yeah. Like why
Eh
would you drive during the
yeah.
day?
And so they say that the energy is starting to change as it's getting darker. And they say Don is pointing out where things in the house used to be, like back in the day when it was a house. And he's saying, like, yes, it's definitely this house definitely was used as a museum and it definitely had Egyptian artifacts. And so the person who owned this house, however many centuries ago, was a collector of Egyptian artifacts. And he, in fact, had an entire floor dedicated to mummies and
Oh,
artifacts obtained illegally from Egypt.
oh my
So that's
God.
not something you want to mess with. That's like a movie,
Yeah,
you
that's like
know?
like literally like The Mummy, the movie.
Right. Yes. Right. Right. And so Don says, the thing that is here and listening to us and talking is angry, it's destructive, and whatever it is that is here doesn't belong in this place. It's from another place. And he's breathing heavy and he's upset and everything. So Barry, I like Barry. Barry goes, well, this is no ordinary haunting by great Aunt Betty. He says it was a jinn, a Jinn, and he says the Western term usually is genie, and it means something trapped in an object, like a genie trapped in a bottle.
Right,
But it's a jinn that is trapped inside an object, like a demon of the desert that needs to be respected.
right.
Have you heard this phrase, the jinn, the Jinn, the jinn?
No, no, I haven't. I really have not.
Something's trapped in an object, but you're like, okay, a genie in a bottle. Where did that come from? It comes from this.
Right, right. Like if because there's movies too all time where like they hold an artifact and
Yes.
then all of a sudden like this dark energy comes out because they played with it or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
trapped in it. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
You're
That's
too young to remember the Brady Bunch, but that happened on the Brady Bunch.
oh, it did. Yeah, I
They
never
had a
watched
little
it.
idol that they took from Hawaii, and they took it home with them, and they had all this bad luck.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But it's funny because 'cause I'm on a couple of these, Facebook groups. One of them is called Things Found in Walls.
Oh, wow.
And there's millions of people on it. And people will find something dug up in their yard and they post a picture of it. What is it? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a relic from this war or whatever. It's
Oh,
really cool.
wow. Yeah, that is actually very
It's
cool.
really cool. Or there'll be something behind a wall when they were renovating and they're like, what does this etching mean? It's really neat. But
That's awesome.
anytime there's anything strange, everybody put it back. Put it
Yeah. Leave it, don't touch it. Leave it.
back. It's a
Don't
portal
move
to
it.
another dimension.
Yeah,
You're
keep
gonna
it
you're
there,
gonna
don't
go.
move it.
You're gonna go to the upside down. Don't touch it.
Yeah, yeah, gonna go upside
So
down, put it back.
yes. So that was this thing. And so Don was like, in this situation, he felt very out of his comfort zone. And Becky was not there. He said he could feel her, but he couldn't hear her. So he could feel that she was there, but she wasn't saying anything. And he says, it's not like the telephone. I can't call up Becky and
Right.
ask her what she's thinking. Like, she wasn't coming to me. He could feel it, but he couldn't hear her. And Barry was like, I'm blown away by this, Don, by, what you're uncovering here, knowing all of that is true from this place in Ireland. And you do have this ability. And I don't think you need Becky.
Right.
So Don says, later on, he was talking to Becky. And Becky tells him, you're going to go to America, specifically Seattle, in 18 months. And so Don tells Steve, I don't know. I was just told in 18 months, we're going to America, specifically Seattle. And Steve's like, okay, great.
Right.
Well, 18 months later, Steve gets a call to the Scientific Establishment of Parapsychology. I wrote it down again. From a guy named Keith Linder, who lived in a town outside of Seattle. Keith had been experiencing poltergeist and paranormal activity, so he called the Scientific Establishment of the Parapsychology to ask for help. Now, here's a question for you.
Yep.
What is the difference when we say poltergeist? I mean, obviously we know Carol Ann Go to the Light from the movie. We know poltergeist. But when we're saying this guy's experiencing poltergeist and paranormal activity, what are we talking about? What's the difference here?
So that's a good question. I don't really know. The only thing I could think of is like good and bad potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Like, like the good energy versus like bad energy, because like when most people bring up like paranormal things, they're typically not good. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not set in a good context. Typically, like when he's going to those paranormal spots and he's, investigating, they're not positive, like, situations. Like there's murders, there's
Yeah.
this, like, so I'm assuming it's good versus bad.
Yeah. And I mean, in the movie Poltergeist, that's exactly what it was. It was hauntings from exactly what this turns out to be. So Steve and Don head to America. They head to Seattle, just like Becky told them they would. And there are all sorts of things being happening in this house. It was literally like a movie, and the house was being trashed from within. Windows were
Crazy.
breaking, furniture. Wasn't it crazy?
Yeah, it was nuts. Yeah.
And you're like, again, it's so hard to believe,
It is.
you
It's
know?
it is. I've seen like people call me and they'll be like, "Do you like can you tell a spirit to leave like a home
Yeah.
and stuff?" And I'm like, "I like that's not what I do, but I can connect to them and through validation and stuff like kind of get to the root of things." But like seeing what I saw in that episode, I'm like, I've never seen that before. Like that was crazy.
And you're like, I don't want to connect with that kind of person.
No way. Like I want to stay away. Like
It's gift giving season, and you know who's on the nice list? It's Quince. It's great when you can give somebody a gift they wouldn't necessarily get for themselves. Right now in my Quince cart, I have a couple of candles that I'm going to be taking for people for hostess gifts when you go to their house for a little party. Don't tell Ingrid because I'm getting her one. The Quince is quality gifts at an affordable price. It's always my go-to. As you know, I'm obsessed with Quince. Right now, I also have some really nice socks in my cart, and I also have a couple of cashmere throws that I'm going to be giving my sisters-in-law for Christmas. You guys, they have the best gifts. Everybody needs in their closet one of their Quince Mongolian cashmere sweaters. I've got a black cardigan. Just throw it on with everything. It's really the best. And the best thing about Quince is the prices. Their cashmere sweaters start at $50, you guys. How do they do this? They partner directly with top factories and cut out the cost of the middleman, which passes the savings on to you. And don't sleep on their suitcases, you guys. I just got an amazing Quince suitcase. So like I said, Quince is on the nice list because they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel for every piece. So gift luxury this holiday season without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/pinkshade for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/pinkshade to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/pinkshade. And when they ask you, where did you hear about Quince? Make sure to say we sent you. So they research and they find out the house was built on a Native American burial ground.
yep.
So even though the investigation was not complete, Keith said, you know what? I'm out. I'm out. Keith vacated the property. Keith
Peace.
had
Yeah.
bye-bye. I'm going to go find just a new apartment building down the
Yeah.
street.
Yeah.
And he'd had enough. But then this other thing happened while they were in Seattle. And this is, Steve says that Don turned to him, and this was, I assume, at this house in Seattle, maybe.
Right.
Don turned to Steve and says, Becky said, you're ready, and she's going to communicate with you directly. And Steve's like, what? And then all this, and this is crazy that they're because they're both like overwhelmed with emotion and crying when they're talking about this separately. Right. And they're saying all of a sudden they were having a conversation and they both heard a woman's voice join the conversation out of thin air, out loud, a clear voice.
Oh, wow.
Join their conversation.
Oh, wow.
And they both heard it.
Yep.
So there were no recording devices needed because they heard it. And Don knew it was Becky, but he had never heard her like that before. And he's never heard it since, just when he was with Steve that one time. So Steve is like, I'll never forget that experience. It bothered me because I was so overwhelmed with like an emotion that I can't describe. And I had no control over my own body.
Right.
I buckled. I fell to the floor. I couldn't breathe. And I never want to experience that again. He said, it's an emotion I'll never be able to explain. It's like an emotion that doesn't exist. And the voice cut through me and it left me in a place where I had to start thinking about life and death and the other side and why me? Why did Becky talk to me? Now, I've imagined you feel that a lot.
Yeah, I always get like that overwhelming sense when I do readings, like every day. And it's also, I always get this like, feeling of like we're here, but there's so much more after here. Like, I don't know how to explain it because because the things that I say and, I even sometimes, it's hard to wrap like even my head around it. So like, I can't like imagine when someone who is a very scientific, analytical person experiences something like that, like it must really rattle their brains. And I've seen it happen. And it's a very interesting thing to watch them, like literally to watch them like experience something like that or to like hear or to go through. And then you can see it's like, wait a minute, like there's something else. Like there is something else. It's very interesting to watch. And it's also like, I know it's going to sound corny, but because it is going to sound corny, but it's kind of like a beautiful thing because then they realize like, not everything is so analytical at times. Like there's more to this. It's not just like what we perceive, textbooks and everything to be at times.
Yeah. I mean, the way he's describing it is similar to how Don had described it too. Like when Becky came to him, that it was like an emotion that didn't exist. So he was unable to explain it because it's something that doesn't exist. And Don says, now Steve's world has totally been rocked because Steve, who has this paranormal scientific institute, was being presented with something that he couldn't explain. He was led to believe, okay, now I do believe there is an afterlife. He's been studying it all these years. And, the two of them, Don and Steve, could not believe that they heard Becky's voice completely clear like that. And never before and never since. So now Barry says he's going to look into who Becky really is.
Right.
And he says he can't find any record of her existing at all. Now, I think it'd be pretty hard to narrow down every plane or train crash in 1985 in every country in the world with a 35-year-old woman with 2 kids,
Right.
So unless there was more information on Becky that was specific, and he says that specific thing, it didn't happen in England, it didn't happen, then that's kind of, but, Barry says what I think is that Becky, whatever Becky is, this entity has lied to Don and is sort of using Don as a medium, I guess, or mouthpiece, sort of, almost.
Kind of like a medium. Yeah.
And if this phenomenon called Becky had lied before, it will lie again. And whoever is Becky, air quotes, doesn't want to be found out. Becky doesn't want you to know who Becky is.
Right.
So they're like, what is Becky? Who is Becky? What kind of phenomena is it? And Barry is saying once this symbiotic relationship between, this entity and Don has happened, it's going to be very hard to break because maybe Becky, this entity Becky, has been with Don his whole life.
Yeah.
And now, as he's an adult, she's experiencing her whole life through him, experiencing his emotions, and the world is, he knows it. So, in fact, yes, it is like a possession of Don.
Yeah, to some degree, yeah.
I mean, when you hear possession, you literally think of like,
Like the people on the bed shaking and then like
yes,
saying all like the demonic stuff,
yes, that's
like
what
in
you
The
think of a
Exorcist
possession,
and stuff.
exorcist.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
but he seems happy go lucky. He seems fine. I want
Yeah,
to know,
no,
like, is Don married? Is the wife jealous of
right.
Becky? Like,
Right, yeah, yeah, like, it's she like, who are you talking to right now? Like, what's
Mhm.
going on?" Like,
It's just Becky.
yeah, it's just Becky, it's
It's
fine.
just it's my gal. It's Becky. It's my friend.
Yeah,
So, Steve says what he has found was that Becky is controlling and powerful, but he doesn't think Becky's necessarily a negative thing, but he doesn't really know. And then
right,
Don himself says, okay, let's just say possession is a real thing, because Don doesn't really believe that. He goes, but if possession is a real thing, like we've seen in the movies, why can't possession be something good instead of something bad?
right,
So maybe I am possessed by Becky. And if I am, that's a good thing because we're doing good things for
right.
people. They're helping people.
Yeah, 100%, and yeah, because I think, it's funny because like, I mean, I'm guilty of this, obviously, it's like when you think of possession, I said The Exorcist, when you think of paranormal, I think of negative,
Yeah,
and that's what
scary.
yeah, and it's, like, scary, but, like, what I've noticed with a lot of, like, energies when I do readings and stuff like that, like, they're all, whether it's a serial killer or not, right? Like, they're not trying to hurt someone, like, on the other side. Like, they're not like, their whole purpose is not to come through me or another medium and try to hurt someone, or, like, if you're sitting at your couch and then you have a mirror above you or, like, a painting, and then they're just gonna knock it off the wall and, like, land on your head and, like, hurt you or kill you or something.
Mhm.
They're really there just to communicate, like, their story or to help,
That's your
and
experience, though, but some of these people are having
I know.
scary things happen, you know?
No, no, 100%. It's just hard for me, I guess, because through my experiences of, like, doing it so often and, like, speaking to, like, the worst of the worst people, like,
Mm.
I'm speaking to, like, the worst of the worst people, not even just, like, people that committed a stupid crime, like, I'm speaking to serial killers or murderers and things, so I don't know. Like, that's just my experience from talking to horrible people.
Do you wonder, because this is just like my limited knowledge, you think that
Yeah,
if an entity, a ghost as it were, is hanging around a house, it's not because they're trying to push the pictures off the wall or mess with people or whatever,
right.
it's more that they're unsettled, that they feel like, they're unsettled, so they're staying in that home where they lived?
Absolutely. A lot of the times, when that happens, someone would have passed away at the house, right? And
Mhm,
so they
mhm,
are unsettled. Like they died in the home, or they died outside of the home. So they're at their home, or that's where their comfort was before they passed. Was
mhm.
that was the house? So it's like that's their comfort spot. So they sometimes may do stuff, but it's again, I don't think it's to like scare someone if they're home alone, then no, like I've heard this, my parents have heard this, like friends have heard this. It's like if you're home alone and you're upstairs and all of a sudden you hear footsteps downstairs and there's no one home. Like you
Mhm.
can't make that up. Like you literally hear footsteps. Like you
Right.
like there's no one there. And I've had that where I was at my aunt and my uncle's house and it was us three and we're upstairs. It's a high ranch. All of a sudden, you hear like thump, 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 like someone walking downstairs on the wood. Like you hear the wood going thump, 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 thump. Like, and then
Yeah.
I walked, and then of course, they're like, "You're the medium. Go downstairs." I'm like, "I don't want to go down there." I'm like, "What the hell?" And
What if it's an
so,
axe murderer?
yeah, I'm like,
Yeah.
"What?" And I go down, and interestingly enough, I kind of tap in, and I find out that the person across the street from them was a ballerina like dancer, and this
Mhm.
is like a whole thing, but like it was like a ballerina dancer, but died and got hit by a car in the street. So she wanders from house to house because her friend used to live in the house, like where my aunt and my uncle live.
Oh
And
my god.
so the only reason why that was even validated was years later, someone was moving out and they were holding a painting of a ballerina dancer. And
Mhm.
my aunt's like, "That's freaking weird." And she walks and she's saying goodbye. She goes, "Oh, who was that?" And she goes, "Oh, that was my daughter who passed. She got hit by a car." But she was like this up and coming big like ballroom ballerina dancer. And
This
They're
is
like,
the across the street neighbor is telling her this.
yeah, yeah, they were
Oh.
moving out. They were, like,
Mhm.
retiring and going down to, like, Florida or something. Um, and my aunt called me and she's like, "You'll never believe this." And this is years later. This isn't, like, 2 months later
Yeah,
or, like this is, like, 3 years later, so I didn't even realize what she was saying. I was like, "That's cool." She's like, "No, like, do you not remember like, having this conversation with me and your uncle?" And I was like,
yeah,
"Not really," because it happened so long ago. But
yeah.
it's, like it's weird stuff like that, like, they'll always stay like, where something happened or where they felt comfortable. At least that's
Yeah,
my experience.
that's what I don't understand when people saying like, "Ooh, and we went to this cemetery and blah, blah, blah," and I was like, "What do you think people are just, like, laying in their coffins?" And because, like, even the story at the beginning here, when they were at the cemetery, they weren't picking up on the people in the graves, they were
No,
picking up on
they're not there.
a crime that happened in the cemetery.
Yeah, they're so, like, I always tell people, like, the truth, and I know people find comfort in going to see, like, you know, the name on the stone and go
Yeah,
in the cemetery, but it's they're not there. They're around you, they're, like, they're not just standing above, like, their cemetery plot, and I try
right.
to explain that to people because, like and again, I completely understand the comfort and the feeling that people get seeing the name going there, but really want people to know, like, they're not just hanging out at the cemetery, and that's why
Yeah,
most mediums will be like, you don't really pick up too much when you're in a cemetery. Like, like when I mean, you will, but it's like, if you're ghost hunting, that's probably not what's gonna come through
mhm.
most of the time. And again, I don't ghost hunt, so I'm
Yeah.
just going off of my experience.
Um
Crazy.
It's crazy. So we end the sorry, the Unsolved Mysteries
Yep.
episode, and Steve says, his life changed completely since he met Dawn, and also Becky.
Yeah.
And, in the 10 years that he's known Dawn, since this has been going on, he's seen no harm come
Yeah.
from Becky. And they seem to need each other and there's no separating them. So for him, it's he hasn't seen that this is any kind of a bad thing.
Right.
And Don says, "Yeah, Becky's a part of me, and if I guess if she suddenly disappeared, like she suddenly came to him, right? If
Right.
she suddenly disappeared, I guess half of me would go too because I don't have any idea why it started, and I
Right.
have no idea where it's going, but I'm just here for the journey." And when we see
Right.
him, he does look like he's probably 60s or 70,
Right.
you know? You kind of think like, wow, could Becky and Don like use their powers to
For
solve
good.
crimes,
Yeah.
yeah, instead of just going, like, getting people out of haunted houses.
Yeah, yeah, they should be I'm sure they're using it for good, and I'm hoping that they are, but yeah, they theoretically should, yeah.
I found it interesting, I go back and forth a lot with,
Yeah,
do I believe this, do I not? But I will say that, you did a reading for me, and I can tell you when it was. It was August of 2020 because it was c
okay.
during COVID. And I was at the beach because we went to the beach for like 2 weeks, and I can remember it being during COVID because I remember the house. I remember the kids that went with us, my kids, friends and all that.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
and I remember I had it scheduled. I was like, "Oh my god, like, I'm gonna do this now," but I'm, like, at the beach and I'm not in my it was so
Yeah,
weird because
yeah.
'cause I've been waiting for a couple of months to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I literally I know you talked to so many people, but what we talked
Yeah,
about was and it's interesting that you just said this a minute ago about the person will come to you before.
yeah.
'Cause you told me, you said, when earlier today, I was meditating on you, talking to you, and this one particular person is pushing, 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 and is not gonna let anybody else talk.
Yeah,
And I was like, "Okay." And now in my mind, I knew who it was, but I wasn't gonna tell you.
of course, yeah, no one does, yeah.
And as you kept going and describing it, I was like, "Okay, well, this is my, ex-boyfriend who died, Beau." And you were telling it and you were like, I don't want and you're so sweet because 'cause you're like, "I don't wanna, like, upset you or say anything, but he
Yeah,
died under bad." I was like, "Yes, he killed himself," but you're trying to say it in a nice way, and I'm
yeah,
sort of like,
yeah.
"Just give it to me. Tell me what he said."
I know,
No,
I'm such a wuss, I know.
but it was, and then we talked, and there's a whole episode about it on Patreon, guys, but
Yeah,
we talked because I had my friend Emily over who was very close with him as well, and we, talked about it. So Bo would have died now. It would be almost 22 years because he died
oh, wow.
before my daughter was born and she's 21. I was pregnant with her when he died, so I couldn't even go home for the funeral. But
Wow.
I remember, so I have had my friend Emily over and I told her nothing. And I recorded me telling her about what you said. And she was just like, "What? There's no way anybody would know that." I was like, it was crazy. But I will tell you that if anybody ever out there is going to get a reading with Jonathan, or you're going to watch his podcast and you can sort of understand, and Kate's talked about this a lot as well,
Yep.
what it did for me, in addition to making me want other people to have this experience,
Thank you.
was it left me. The burden of it left me, and it wasn't my burden to bear. He killed himself. We were, had been broken up for obviously many, 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 many years. I was married with having a baby with somebody else, but we had always been close friends, and I was always worried about him because of his addiction issues, and always keeping up with him through Emily and her husband, and always worried about him, always. And what it did was he would come to me all the time, right? Like I would see a shirt, or I would see somebody be like, that looks like him, or that kind of looks like his mom, or Bo had every day something my whole life, all those years. At that point, it had been probably 18 years. It would come to me every day somehow. And after I talked to you, it left me completely. Do you
Like,
find that a lot? Like, I just didn't have that on me anymore, that I
oh,
saw
like
him
the
all the
burden. I didn't
yeah.
know. Yeah. So that, like, what's funny is I think it does happen a lot. I always, try to be honest with people. It's like when you come for a reading, like obviously one, you have to be ready. Like no one should force you to do it. But two, the goal is to help you take a step forward in your closure or grief. Like I don't expect to completely stop it, but a lot of times people, like, you lifted a burden, because a majority of the time in readings, it gets so intimate and personal about very specific things that, are very intimate and personal. And you can see for when they come in, or at least for me, when they come in, and then when we leave the session, reading, whatever people want to call it, it's like they feel lighter. I don't know how to explain it.
That's what it was.
Like they feel lighter, and they're like a little bit, their head's trying to wrap around it, but you can tell their demeanor is just very different and lighter. Like I don't know how to explain it. Like,
I don't know. All I
I don't
could
know how to
say was
explain
it
it.
felt like it literally, I felt like it left me. And I wasn't every day worried, because I mean,
No.
he's been dead for a long time,
Right.
and I had no siblings, and, I wasn't close with his mother or anything. So it wasn't like it was in my life. It just was something that I did not know was weighing on me
Yeah.
until it was gone. And then when it was gone, because I talked to you, I was like, oh my gosh. I don't know if I felt like, okay, he is at peace now because
Right.
he had such, struggles with addiction and everything,
Right.
or I don't know what it's a lightness, and it
Yeah.
literally left me in the sense that I don't now see him everywhere I go. And I don't see a certain outfit and go, "Oh my god, he would have worn that," or
Right.
anything. It's
It
the
makes
wildest thing I've ever experienced. Really.
well, I'm happy that it, like, helped you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's my goal with when I do this with whoever it is just to help. So I'm very thankful that I was able to help.
Now, okay, speaking of help, okay, you have been helping on various cases. Now, tell
Yeah.
me about the one specifically, the one in San Antonio of
Yeah.
the mom who's disappeared. Now, obviously, the husband is accused of doing something. Do we know
Yeah.
what's happening there?
Yeah. So you know, I got reached out to by Amanda Klutz. And Amanda Klutz was like, I have a friend who, I know you work a lot with law enforcement in these cases
Mhm.
and things like that. And she's like, you need to speak to my friend. So the friend emailed me and was like, there's a really big case, like a really big case. It's picked up all over, but I don't want to tell you. I have the email still. And she's like, I really want to go on your show because I want, people to hear my version and, like, not to be so, like, as people would say, like, PR trained, right? Like people go
Okay.
on and, like,
Yeah.
talking and they have to be careful. She's like, I just want the reading, I want the help, and I want the exposure, whatever. And I was like, okay. So I'm envisioning when I log into the recording, whatever, that I'm going to be speaking to a friend, because she said the woman was in her 60s, I believe. So I envisioned the friend to be in the 60s. She switched, like, this happens all the time. She
Mhm.
switched it out, and, like, a girl in her, like, 20s, like 19 or 20, like, came on to, like, the recording thing.
Yeah.
And it turned out that it was Suzanne's daughter. So the case is Suzanne Clark Simpson. So the crazy thing is I had the recording and I did the reading on a Tuesday. Like, and that Thursday, in this same week, the father was convicted of and charged of the murder of Suzanne, like within the 2 days. So they took, like, I gave the reading to Chandler, and that's the daughter of Suzanne, and she passed it along to like the Almost Park police, the Texas Rangers, like all these people. And then 2 days later, after what's it called? They convicted and charged the father, Brad, of the murder. And what gets weirder is like some of the stuff I was saying in there. Um, they the police reached out and they're like, you need to take this out of the episode. We're using this as like a direction for us to find Suzanne because Suzanne is missing still, but they have
Right.
so much evidence against the father that he killed her. So it's and some of the stuff I said. So I literally,
So the father's been arrested, but they
yeah.
haven't found her.
Yeah,
Right.
he was convicted. I mean, like, I kind of like after I spoke to her, I obviously looked it up because I was like, all right, now I want to see how big this is. Like, after I just spoke to her, and it was interesting because they kept raising the bail, and that's what I read. It would start kind of small, and then it went up to like $2 million. And I was like,
Mm,
all right, they have enough on him, I guess, at this point. But anyway, so it's it's just a crazy case because the Almost Park community is a very private community and has its own private police. And what I've been
yeah.
learning from doing cases all over the country with different departments and different states, that some of the police are not equipped to do cases like this. They just don't have
Yeah.
the manpower, they don't have the money. So they the families get frustrated. They reach out to me and then they connect me to the police. And the police is like, okay, let's do this. And it's a very interesting thing, but I'm very happy I was able to help. And I guess now the news in like Texas is like doing a piece on me because of it and all
Cool.
this stuff. And it's bizarre because my sole intention really was to give Chandler closure from her mom, but also to help just turn a corner in the case, not solve it, but just turn a corner to put them in a different direction to help find Suzanne. And I'm just happy that it's going in that direction for her and her family. Like that's
Yeah.
my goal. Like it's been a crazy ride with that.
Mm. Well, tell everybody about your podcast and where they could find it and when you put it out
Yeah.
and all that.
Yeah, so my podcast is called Connect with Jonathan Mark. We are on season 2 right now, and we're focusing a lot on helping families with unsolved cases across the country,
Mhm.
and with law enforcement obviously being attached. And you can find it wherever you get your podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever.
And your first season, you said you told me earlier you had, some, like, celebrities on and stuff, and then this
Yep.
season, you're doing a little more focus on the true crime aspect.
That's correct. So like the first season we did was heavily celebrity based, and I kind of, wanted to help a little bit more, so I turned to like what I think I'm known for in the unsolved arena, and I've been focusing on that, but I'm still going to bring on celebrities, but we're going to be talking about cases instead of me just doing like the reading and then talking to them and everything. Like I always want to continue to help highlight cases, and like now that's my goal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was great talking with you, and it's
Thank
good
you.
to see you
Yes.
again. I mean, we've talked
Yeah.
on the phone and we've
Yep.
texted and stuff, but I haven't seen you in a long time.
I know, it's been a while.
It's
Thank you
been
for
a while.
having me.
Don't hang up. We're going to end, but everybody,
Yeah,
go and look for Jonathan's podcast. Connect with Jonathan Mark wherever you get your podcasts, and he is always doing something really, really interesting. And you have like Instagram and all that stuff too, right?
I do.
Yeah,
Yes.
Jonathan
It's
Mark Medium. Is that
it's
what it
Jonathan
is?
Mark Medium, super easy.
So if anybody wants to reach out for a reading and get on your list, which I know your waiting list is long, should they
Yep.
reach out through there? And there's email,
Yeah, you can go to my Instagram or my website at jonathanmark.net and just fill it out, and someone will get back to you pretty quickly.
jonathanmark.net. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.